right on to the process. So this is going to be a global overview of the process. I do get into some more details on this stuff. This is the too much information series, so it's going to be a good amount, but there's still more to learn. And basically just know this: a good agent is going to hold your hand through every step in the process, and they're going to re-explain everything you need at the time that you need it. I just like for my clients to know globally what's coming at them, so there's no big surprises. So it's broken down into 3 phases. Phase 1, I consider preparing. And if you do a good job preparing, it'll make everything else easier. Phase 2 is searching for the home that you want to purchase. And phase 3 is closing. Each one of these phases has its own kind of timeline, and it really depends on your situation. I would say the shortest amount of time that you could go from phase 1 all the way to the end of phase 2 closed on a home, I've seen it happen in 14 days from our initial meeting to the closing of the property. And I've also had some clients that I'm still working with, investors who are just looking for very particular things. And so everyone's a little bit different. All right, so within preparing, there's the buyer's consultation, which you are actually experiencing right now. So this is actually good use of time, I promise. This is also the thing that if you want to do it one-on-one, ask questions in a live environment, get a beer or a coffee with me, I'm happy to do that for free. Then there's a loan consultation, which is kind of the same thing with a lender. Again, it should be very educational. It should, really open your eyes to all the different options. And by doing both of these, the buyer's consultation and the loan consultation, you learn everything you need to know, right? So many people are, I think, timid to sit down and engage with a lender or an agent because I think either A, they think it costs something, it's all free, or B, they think it obligates them to do something. It doesn't. It just gives them information. And I think with information, once you're armed with that, then you can make a good decision, which is why the next step is to strategize. Once you know everything about the buying process and whether or not it's right for you and what you can afford, then you can make the decision about whether or not you want to head down that road. So that strategize piece is really coming together with any other purchase participants, making sure that you know exactly how you want to go about it. And I also think at that point too, really, really good to nail down your team. So you should have already had a consultation or two, if you're going to be essentially shopping lenders or agents, and by all means do. I think more power to you. I'm always happy to compete. So then after strategizing, I'd say that's the point at which you set up the search. And if you just dive right in and you're on Redfin and you click I want more information, you're on Zillow, I want more information, you're going to get someone who's paying to be on those sites, which isn't necessarily, I think, the best way to go. That's why I think if you do the consultations first with people that you trust or people that you know and trust have recommended to you, that's a better way to go than you can just know who you're going to for the search rather than being randomly assigned someone who couldn't build their own business. All right, once you get into the search, so you'll have a search set up on the multiple listing system, and then you'll go through with your agent and you'll view properties, and it's absolutely essential because the pictures lie, for sure. And you'll make adjustments. The first iteration of the search for me is always pretty broad, and then we narrow it down as I start to learn my client's preferences. And so over time it gets more and more dialed in until you're really at the right place. And then if the right property isn't coming up still because of the lack of inventory, then you might need to make some adjustments and maybe either raise the price at that point, or open the geography, or let go or relax one of your criteria. Finally, when you do all of that and you find a property that you enjoy and you can see yourself living in, you can see yourself owning, I would say at this point, a property that checks off 85% of your needs, then I would say we do a little value analysis of it. Because quite frankly, I'm a generalist, not a hyper-localist, meaning I couldn't tell you what every single model in this neighborhood that I live in goes for. I wait for the moment when my client determines that it's something that they can actually see themselves living in, and that's when we go home and we do our research. So we will do a full-on comparative market analysis, which is a smaller version of an appraisal done by a real estate agent, but we look at all the exact same things. And through doing that, we can kind of figure out where we think it might appraise. Now, that's not the only component of value. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then once we've got a number, we talk it over. And once you're comfortable, we put a specific number on an offer, and we submit that offer. Then, if our offer is accepted, we would drop off earnest money. Then we would do an inspection to make sure that the home is right for you. We would go through an appraisal to make sure that the home is, of the correct value, is collateral for the loan for the bank. And then finally, you go through final underwriting, which is making sure that you still make sense for the bank as a borrower. And then you close. So we're going to jump in and do some details on all of these phases and all of these steps. If you want to, you can cut out here and jump to the next video, or you can stick with us. So for preparing, strategizing is really the part where I think budgeting is huge. And then if you are currently renting, you need to look at your lease options, right? So strategizing also means if we still have 6 months on our lease and how much does it cost to break it, then when should we start looking? The truth is, look into how much it costs to break your lease. It's usually 1 month, 2 months, or the remainder of the lease to break. If it's either the first two, typically if that means the difference between looking in the fall or winter and looking in the spring or summer, that could be a $30,000 swing for the same house. So if your rent is only $1,800, then obviously break your lease if you find the right place. Occupancy plan is also another thing you should strategize on. If you are selling a place, how do you do that? How do you sell and how do you move and possession, all that? We can help you with that. The time frame for your search, any investment strategy. This is all a good time to come up with the ideal plan, and then we always want our clients to have a plan B too, so that you're never stuck, right? Because when you're stuck, that's when you start to make poor financial decisions. So if you do own, this is the order of operations. You can actually sell your home first and then purchase later. That means you liquefy your down payment right away. You have no contingency. You get to time both markets, so you can actually sell when it's ideal to sell and buy when it's ideal to buy. Now the cons are you have to move twice and you have to have somewhere to go. You can actually purchase first before you sell. The pros are you can wait for the motivation, wait for the right home to come along. You can actually time the market again in the same way we talked about before, and you can move once. The cons here is you must have the equity, or you must qualify for the second mortgage, the second payment. So you should really know your carrying costs and pad your budgets appropriately, because you might be stuck paying two for, 30, 60 days. Just be prepared for it. And then there's concurrent, which is traditional. People are going to sell the home that they're living in to buy another home and move. And the pros are that there are low or no carrying costs. It's easier to do in a seller's market. You get to move once. Now the cons are you have a contingent offer, meaning that when you go into the marketplace as a seller who's also trying to buy, sellers of the houses that you're looking to purchase are probably not going to take you as seriously because your money's not there. In fact, your house isn't even sold yet. So the further along your contingent sale is, the more likely they'll take your offer. It's subject to the market, right? So if you're doing it when it's hard to sell, it's going to be easy to buy, and vice versa. And there's a shorter time frame. This could potentially happen in as little as 30 days if you do it in lockstep. Searching. So buying can be emotional and exhausting, and if you're still watching this, then you are definitely emotionally invested, and you're teaching yourself, which I think is great. You're being prepared, which is exactly what it says in my head. Be prepared. Let's see here. So here's some common mistakes that I've seen. Data reliability, don't trust all sites. A lot of them out there, so Zillow, have really delayed information, so it might say that the house is still available and it's not. So do not click want more information unless you want someone to be bugging you. Don't set your filters too aggressively. If you say you absolutely want 3 fireplaces and it wasn't required that the agent list how many fireplaces there were, then you could miss all the great 3 fireplace places because you required that, right? As opposed to when we first set up our searches, we do a pretty loose draft one. And if it's too much noise or it's too much work to kind of filter through those things online, then we can start to narrow it down. The pictures do lie. They're almost always HDR, high dynamic range photography. They're almost always wider angle lenses, and sometimes they're touched up or virtually staged. So really you have to get in the home. Signs, agents don't update them. So if you see a sign in the yard, that house is not necessarily for sale. It could be under contract or even sold or coming soon. If it's not in your search as you're driving around with your agent, it's highly likely it's not a good fit. So it's either under contract and not, marked as such, outside your price range, or one of those criterion that you decided to filter by doesn't fit. The only reason that it would have a sign and not be in your search is if it's a for sale by owner, which is that last part, the FSBO. For sale by owners are not on the multiple listing system, which is usually why they take longer to sell. And so if you do see one of those, simply take a picture of it and send it to your agent. Your agent can give that person a call and negotiate for you. So seeing through staging, this one comes with some time, but you will be able to see basically through the clutter and through everything else to see either things that they might be hiding or things, features that they're accentuating with the staging. And then here's the other thing too. Almost inevitably, your stuff will not look nearly as cute as the stager stuff. So don't buy it because of that. Really try to look through that to see and picture your stuff in there. And things like paint, those kind of easy aesthetic things, they don't cost much. So know that if you walk into a house that's unstaged and, still has some garish colors, and then you walk into the same model that's staged with, more modern colors, and there's a $50,000 price difference, that's probably a $6,000 paint job, at max. All right, knowing what you can change and what you can't. A lot of people, especially clients of mine that are just starting, often have the goal of adding sweat equity, so putting in their time to exchange it for money and really fix a place up that needs it. But the truth is, I was in the same situation, and I thought I really wanted to find a fixer, but my wife stopped me when we found our first home, which was already fixed. I said, I don't want this one because I can't add money to it. She said, well, I know you can do these things, but will you? Like when? When will you? And I couldn't answer the question. So putting sweat equity in takes a lot of time. Figure out if that's something you really have and you have the desire to do before you buy a fixer-upper, because it's not like the montage that you see on HGTV, I promise. Will you hate living in an up-and-coming area before it's cool? Now, that's another way to build a lot of equity in your home quickly, is to buy in a place that, the prices are going up very, very quickly. But to live on the urban edge means you're living on the urban edge. So if it's someplace that you drive by at night, you don't want to get out of your car, you probably don't want to live there. I mean, quite frankly, might be good as an investment property later, for sure. But if you're actually living there, live someplace you're comfortable. I mean, it's going to be all about your quality of life. And finally, cream puffs, which we describe as the houses that are in great condition, great location, great price. They sell really, really quickly in any market. So don't delay if there's something you really, really love and that's just, you're head over heels for. Don't say, oh, we'll see it on the weekend. Call your agent, text your agent right then, and let them know, and they'll figure out a good plan of attack. How to adjust. So when you're going through your search and things just aren't kind of, clicking, what do you do? So, like I said, I really do think that you should consider anything that meets about 85% of your criteria. And if you aren't finding those, then you might have to loosen some of your criteria. If you're going to overpay for something, if you're in a rising market, overpaying is really just a matter of time. So if you are going up by 6% per year, and you overpay by 3%, that's only 6 months that you're behind. In that half a year, you'll basically be caught up. So reframe overpaying if you have to do it, and know the home is probably not your final resting place. It's very likely a stepping stone, so treat it as such. It's a good fit for now. Some off-market strategies if you're in a really low inventory environment where there's nothing really for sale. You can write neighborhood letters, a letter to all the different neighborhoods where the median home price makes sense and has a lot of models that really make sense for you, and see if you can find someone who's been thinking about selling. I've done that for many of my clients. I found you do have to write about 300 letters to get a response or two. So it takes a little bit of time, but I like to do that for my clients specifically, and you can do it on your own if you're working with an agent that's not willing to do that. Talk about your search. Talk about it with anybody and everybody you can, because quite frankly, you never know where it's going to come from. We bought our first house when my wife was complaining about the home search with her coworker, who was complaining about the home sale process. and we put it together, and it was great. So please talk about your search. Specifically for us, we are always asking for referrals. That's the way we run most of our business. It's 85% referral. So we ask. We ask you to talk about it for your own benefit, and for those people that we might be able to serve as well. And finally, pocket listings. Anytime you can find a large brokerage or a large team, we do have 30 members on our team and 750 plus in our brokerage. There's always intra-office communication where we can just reach out and say, does anybody have this or this coming up? And you might be able to get it before it hits market. Finally, creative financing. If you're running into some troubles there, financial assistance is available. There are subsidies, and we also do a referral program as well. Moving on. Determining the value, we talked about this a little bit, but it's not just so first of all, a home is worth what a buyer is willing to pay and what a seller is willing to sell it for, right? That's the true definition of the value. But there's really these four components of value. The listing price being kind of just a jumping off point, a good starting point, but doesn't necessarily always wind up there, especially depending on the time of year. The second price, that value concept, I would say, is what it will appraise for. And that's what we do the comparative market analysis, the CMA, to determine, right? So we look at all the data that the appraiser would look at and try to figure out where it'll appraise. Now, appraisal is a little bit more of an art than it is a science, which means that two different appraisers could bring in two different values, and they can be pretty drastically different. But we can get to a pretty close range to say, is this house priced right or overpriced? And it's a very consequential price, because if you're leveraged to the degree that you're bringing 5% of a down payment, then they'll only give you 95% of what it appraises for, regardless of where you offer. Now, competing offers, that's the next highest value. And we can only learn that as agents if the other agents tell us, which not all of them do. So I've learned some Jedi mind tricks over the years on how to kind of get those, numbers out of them, or getting really, really close. But then once you learn that number, that is now the most consequential price, because that's the one you have to beat in order to get the home. But it's still not the most consequential price. The most consequential price is your maximum, right? So if you were to be outbid in a bidding war by $1,000, could you sleep that night? If the answer is no, then it's probably worth at least $1,000 more to you, right? So ask yourself those questions. We'll collect that information there in the middle, and with all four of these kind of value concepts, we'll come up with an offer price that you feel comfortable with, and then we'll sign an offer and we'll submit it, right? So when you build a winning offer, really what you're trying to do is first of all, there's a lot of different ways to manipulate the contract to buy and sell here in Colorado, even though it's a fill-in-the-blank contract. Little tactical advantages that can be given on any of the 18 pages of legalese. So it's good to know exactly what you're doing when you're filling out the contract, and working with an agent will definitely ensure that. And then really what you're trying to do, the name of the game, is to learn all your sellers' fears. And if you can answer any of their fears without throwing more money at them, that's how you build a competitive offer, again, without overpaying. So you can mess with things like the price, obviously. There are things like escalation clauses. You can mess with the timeline, the objection and resolution timelines, inspection limitations, saying you're going to take the home essentially as is. You can guarantee the appraisal to the degree that you're financially able. You can change up the fee structure a little bit, any post-closing occupancies. So you can also give your seller of the home you're trying to purchase time to live in their own home after you own it and rent it back from you while they find their new home. And finally, contingencies. So if you do have to sell to buy, that's something that it can be difficult to deal with. So if there's a way you can release your contingency, that will make you more competitive. All right, moving on to closing. Almost done. Once you are under contract, the first thing that's going to be due within at least 72 hours is earnest money. Earnest money is a buyer's skin in the game, essentially. It's typically 1% of the purchase price that is due about 48 to 72 hours after you go under contract. It's just a personal check that you bring to the title company, and they cash it and they hold it in escrow while you determine whether or not you want the home still. For the next 30 days or so, you're going to be doing all these different investigations, and if at the end of it, these are the two questions I get asked the most. If at the end of it, you don't want the home, is it refundable? And the answer is yes. With a great realtor, your earnest money is almost 100% refundable up until your loan. It's actually now called the new loan termination deadline for Colorado If you don't want the home, you will get it back, but you will have invested your inspection costs to investigate the home, right? We talked a little bit about that $600 to $700 that you don't get back. You pay that person to do their job. Then what if you do close? Well, if you close, it's actually part of your down payment. So let's say you were planning on bringing 5% as a down payment. Then if you put 1% into your earnest money, when you come bring your cash to close, you're going to pay 4% of the purchase price plus your closing costs that you discussed with your lender. Make sense? All right, inspection. A little bit more about the inspection process. Basically, you're gonna hire the inspector. They're gonna go out there and do their job. We try to get all this information done within the first week, and it's gonna, I promise you, even a new build is gonna be, 50, 60 pages long, the report. It's gonna make it seem like the home's falling down, and that's what you want. You want them to be thorough, but don't be too alarmed by it, right? Be cautious, but don't get scared off, because every home's gonna have just a huge book. You want a thorough inspector. Some big things, anything health and safety related, most oftentimes, even in the seller's market, the sellers are going to correct those. But they don't have to. There's only one thing that they legally have to do, and that's carbon monoxide alarms. Everything else is kind of up to them. There are some very common things such as, clean service and certification, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Doing a radon test is probably a really important thing to do. That's about $150. You can do a roof inspection, and then some big heavy hitters. Basically, these are things that as we're walking through prior to ever putting an offer in, since I flipped homes, if I see them, I'm trying to save my clients money. So if I see that there's foundation issues, if I see that, the whole electrical has been recalled, if I see that the roof is torn up or the windows all need to be replaced, those are all really heavy hitters, and likely if they're priced, in the market and they're not considering that in the price, then it's probably not the best path to go down anyway. Let someone else take that lemon. And then finally, you will do the initial inspections. However, let's say the first inspector says, oh, there's a bunch of electrical work that needs to be done. Well, if it needs to be investigated before the work is completed, then you would actually put the ownership of the secondary inspection on the seller through the inspection resolution. You simply say, seller will have licensed electrician investigate or diagnose and repair or replace as necessary X, Y, and Z. So a lot of the secondary inspections that might cost even more money can be paid for by the seller. Then when you get to resolution, you have a couple different options. The seller can repair if they have the money, the things that you need them to repair. They can also give you money at closing for you to do the repairs, and that's called seller concession. They can lower the price as well, but that's not the same as keeping the money in your pocket, right? So when they lower the price, it simply lowers your payment, but your down payment plus your closing costs are going to be so similar that you won't really have a lot of extra money in your pocket. The seller concessions is the way to go if you want to keep the money in your pocket to do the repairs. And then finally, if the seller doesn't have the money and you don't want to do concessions, or you've maxed out your concessions, or you don't want to do price, you can do repair escrows as long as your lender approves it, which means when you close, the some of the proceeds will be kept, usually about 150 to 200% of whatever the job is it's necessary. So if it's replacing the roof for $15,000, they might hold on to 20 or 25, and then they will have the roofer go out there and do the roof repair after you own it, and then they will essentially pay the roofer out of the escrow from title, and then whatever's extra goes back to the seller. That's a repair escrow. This is a pretty tricky negotiation, but it's good that we have so many options for resolution, because quite frankly, that gives us a lot of ways to really work that negotiation into your benefit. And after that, we do appraisal. So once the inspection is taken care of, we do that in the first week. The appraisal usually comes between week 2 and 3, and the appraiser is engaged. So the appraisal is paid for by the buyer. The appraiser, him or herself, is engaged by the lender, and they cannot be chosen. They have to be completely at random so that there can't be a bias. So the appraiser will pick up a bid, and they will go out to the house and they will do a site visit. And then after the site visit, they will do a calculation. They'll do a comparative market analysis similar to what we did, only a little bit more in depth. and they will determine how much the home is worth. So for sellers, you basically have to sell the home twice, once to the buyer and once to the appraiser. For a buyer and a buyer's agent, you can't actually talk to the appraiser at all. You can't have any contact with them, so you cannot influence that number whatsoever. If basically we as agents work in a collaborative manner to support the needs of our clients, which in this case we both want a higher appraisal, so the listing agent should be doing what they can do to support the appraisal and the appraiser with any data that they don't have, if that makes sense. If there are not many good comparable properties, it can be really difficult for an appraiser to do their job. They might have to make adjustments in time or in size or a few other things, but yeah, basically the appraisal will happen, and if it comes in low, which 25% of sales at some times of the year, not all times of the year, do not appraise, you might want to have pre-negotiated that in your offer about like what you would do as a buyer, like I'll pay $1,000 over whatever appraise is at, or you might just have to negotiate it at the time, or you might have to start over if there's too big a gap there. Some resolution options for appraisal are you could do a price reduction. So if the appraiser says it's not worth that much, the seller doesn't have to lower the price, but in order to move forward with that buyer, if that buyer can't bring additional money, they can reduce the price. The buyer can bring cash over the appraised value. So if it was appraised lower, but the buyer brings more cash to pay to the seller, it doesn't go to anything for them. It's not part of their equity, it's not part of their down payment. It's going straight to the seller to pay the difference. And then you can also challenge the appraisal, meaning that you can say, we think that it was materially incorrect. There's some sort of fact that's missing here, and you can challenge some appraisals. It has to be materially flawed. So that is about it for appraisals. And then you go into final underwriting. So now the house makes sense for you in the condition, the loan makes sense, the house makes sense as collateral in terms of its price, and you still need to make sense for the lender. So final underwriting is just them checking one more time pretty much everything they've already checked to make sure you're still a good borrower. And they'll get your homeowner's insurance, they'll get your verification of employment again, pay stubs, bank statements. They will do another credit check at this point, and they'll ask for a bunch of letters of explanation, meaning like if a bunch of money came in and they didn't know about it, they want to know, why did that money come in, or why did that money go away? So you do want to receive your clear to close from your lender prior to your loan objection or new loan termination deadline. If you don't do that, that's usually the final step in final underwriting, is that you get a clear to close saying you're fully approved. If you don't get that by your new loan termination deadline, you need to extend that deadline or your earnest money is at risk. That is very important. Then you get ready to close. You go ahead and you see a closing disclosure, which will be all of your facts and figures, all of your figures outlined for you. You get to do a final walkthrough, and you'll get that 3 days prior to closing. You'll get to do a final walkthrough of the home to make sure that any of the repairs that you agreed upon are done to your satisfaction, and that it was vacant for 30 or 45 days, that nobody squatted in it or anything like that. If it's still occupied and they're going to live there and rent it back for a little bit, then I would suggest taking some pictures. And you're going to gather all the necessary documents for closing. There's not a whole lot. You just need a check, you need some identification, and we'll tell you everything you need. So the one caution here is that wire fraud is on the rise, so you would never see an email asking you to send money to anywhere without a double or triple verification from the title company, so just be aware. And then yay! Oh wait, I have something for this. Wow. Then you go to closing. Yay! That's it. That's the process.